of the podcasts. This will be the first review. I'm trying to get the videos at least probably around 10 minutes, under 15, hopefully. What I will say is that I'll be using probably some examples of lifters that I coach or athletes that I coach, or that I know of well. So this might be more benefit to people who know me well, but if not, I'm sure people will still get something out of this. So even if you only take one thing from this, obviously you still learn something. So that's all that really matters. The first podcast then I'll jump straight in is obviously, like I said in my introduction video, this is going to be in no real order, but I'm actually the first one was episode 360 of Travis Mash's The Barbell Life, and this was with Mike Boyle. It was called Coaching Wisdom with Mike Boyle. So basically they just talked. There wasn't a specific subject, but Mike Boyle is a legend, an absolute legend in the S&C world. Coaches he's been incredibly successful with sports like ice hockey and football, and if you don't know him, I suggest you definitely look into him. They said in the podcast that if you don't know Mike Boyle, you're a bad S&C coach. Obviously, that's not true, but you're missing out a lot. You really are missing out. I'd actually recommend Mike Boyle's book called Functional Training for Sports, I believe. It's a very good one. I might have it. Functional Training for Sports. It's a very good book. There's stuff I take from there that I still use now, to be honest. But yeah, what I'll do is I'll just go through some of the notes. I've only made 4 points, so I'll go through them and hopefully someone will get something out of this, but also I'll get something out of it. The first point was obviously in a very Mike Boyle way. Now, if you don't know Mike Boyle, he came from powerlifting, I think, and then he basically went anti-powerlifting. He doesn't prescribe squats to any of his athletes, as in barbell squats. He does get them goblet squatting. He does a lot of single leg work. He does power cleans as well. Other than that, and bench press. Other than that, it's single leg work, basically. So the first bit he was talking about was single leg work, and he said he wouldn't, but he did almost immediately, and how useful it can be. Talked a lot about the bilateral deficit, which is a phenomenon where the sum of the force produced by both legs individually, it is more than the sum of is more than the force produced by both legs done at the same time. So the theory is if you sat in a isokinetic dynamometer, which is basically a machine that measures force output, and if you do a single leg extension, for example, on the left leg and then the right leg, the sum of those forces will be more force than if you did it both legs at the same time. Now, not everyone is this way, obviously, but ideally, I think most people actually are. They produce more force single leg. Actually, we'll have to look into this actually a little bit more because they didn't talk about it loads. But from what I remember from university days, doing S&C, was that the reason is you actually produce more force. So doing single leg, something about neural blocking between hemispheres in the brain, as well as cross-extensor reflex, obviously, which runs across the body in a cross shape from doing single leg works. Whereas if you do double leg, you get a bit more inhibition, a bit more neural inhibition, which doesn't allow you to produce so much force, which is really interesting. It'd be a good way to test people, getting them to do if you have testing that's like if you have a force plate, for example, or jump tests like vertical jump, RSI even, if you were to do double leg and then if you were to do a single leg, and you could, if the sum of the single legs is no way near, if the sum of the single leg jumps is no way near the height of the double leg jump, then there's an issue. If it's over 50%, then you're probably okay. Obviously, things like balance and coordination come into play a lot, so you can't take that for too much granted. But Yeah, he doesn't prescribe front squats. He doesn't prescribe, sorry, squats, back squats. He does, I think he might prescribe front squats to some people, but he's not huge on them. And Trav Master was talking about Ryan Grimsland, who is his youth or junior, young, basically, weightlifter, who's absolutely phenomenal. He's clean and jerked, I think, 170 as like an 81 or an 89 kilo lifter, about 18 years old. And leading into his last comp, he only did front squats once a week, I think, and everything else was single leg stuff, and he still PB'd his clean and jerk, which is incredible. Especially because he was an elite lifter anyway. He wasn't just a beginner who will get stronger off literally any program. That's my information for the day. If you have a beginner and they're not getting stronger, then there's something seriously wrong, because they get stronger off literally anything. So, and this is actually quite useful. I was the same with the comp I just did. I only front squatted once, I believe. No, I did. I front squatted once a week. I did Anderson front squats the other day, for way less load, obviously. But my front squat still went through the roof. So, second thing I talked about was Jamaican sprinting and genetics, and the reason they think that, well, genetics. The reason they think Jamaica is a lot better at producing sprinters, is that there's actually a stretch of road or a town or something where basically all the top Jamaican sprinters ever have originated from. But more than, I don't know if that's a myth or not, but more than that, which is a phenomenal little pool of genetic brilliance where everyone born is just incredibly gifted in terms of sprinting. But more than that, they talk about circumstance as well. And if you have someone in America, for example, or the UK, who's unbelievably gifted genetically, they're probably never going to have to try hard ever. They'll run faster than all the other rugby players. They'll be picked for every team. And that they gave the example that they've never had someone who's been genetically gifted who has worked hard, and that makes a lot of intuitive sense, doesn't it? If you've got someone who is phenomenal, just naturally incredible at all sports, then they're not going to work hard, are they? So I think there has to be some kind of hardship, and it's the same in life, really, isn't it? They have to have some kind of hardship. So don't get me wrong, I don't think I'm naturally gifted in every sport, but I do realise that I am quite lucky with genetics. Both parents were national level sprinters, both from a long line of power athletes in the family, boxing but heavy Deontay Wilder style power punchers, and sprinters and rugby. But then I use my shoulder as the thing that I think is the circumstance for me, that makes me work hard, is that I didn't get a lot of things easy because I was obviously incredibly disabled. Now they use the example of Johan Blake, who grew up in a one room house with like 12 other people, and his circumstance was that he wanted to get out, obviously, and get his family some money. So that's why he worked hard, as well as being the genetic 0.01% kind of thing. So that plays a big part of it. And they also talked about, look, when you talk about programs like West Side being successful and Soviet style being successful, so yes, it absolutely was. But if everyone's the genetic freak and on steroids, like, that doesn't necessarily mean it's the only good way. It's like if you say to a clean athlete who's a high level, oh, we're going to do West Side style to get your powerlifting numbers up, might work, but it's not to say it will definitely work if they're not taking drugs and they're not kind of gifted in the ways that the West Side guys were. But everything obviously is a fantastic system, both of them. But yeah, that was another good point they made. And then finally they talked about sprinting in the weight room, how it's vastly underutilized. Most people use sprinting just as a test, so they had like test 40 meters, but they never actually train it. And he got a lot of success from testing them every week and seeing improvements every week, because obviously they were training it. Say a 40 meter sprint or a 10 meter sprint. Now, if you get the best weightlifter in the world, the fastest weightlifter in the world, to do a power snatch at 70 to 80%, like it's gonna move fast. It's gonna be around 2 meters per second. No matter how hard you try, you will not be faster than that. Whereas if you get a bad level sprinter, someone who is not that fast, but they're sprinting as fast as they can, you're looking at around 8 meters per second. Now this isn't for an untrained person, but this is just for an athlete who, you know, is relatively okay. 8 meters per second. They quoted, even if it wasn't 8 meters per second, even if you got someone off the street and it was kind of more a 6, you're still looking at 3 to 4 times as fast as any weightlifting, any movement, and that's weightlifting movements. That's the fastest movements in the gym that aren't throws or plyometrics. It pales in comparison to sprinting, so that's why you really need to have sprinting in your program. If you're coaching anyone who needs to sprint or needs to be fast, which is pretty much any athlete, if you want a high neural demand stimulus that is gonna force you to move faster, then sprinting is the answer. Now, obviously, you've got to prepare for it. You obviously have to train to sprint. You can't just jump straight into sprint. If you're half educated and you jump straight into sprints and are shocked that you tear a hamstring or pull a hamstring, then I'm sorry, but it's your own fault. If you coach someone to do that, then that's not great either. Yeah, and then the final thing he talked about was coaching weightlifting. Obviously, it's a weightlifter running the podcast, or a weightlifting coach running the podcast, but Mike Boyle's not known for weightlifting coaching. But he talked about not over-cueing people. Now, I think he's right. I think the sign in here, the sign of not a bad weightlifting coach, but what shows me that someone is very inexperienced in coaching skills, is someone who cues too much. So every time someone misses, or every time someone lifts, gives them cues. Oh, you need to work on this, always overly explicit in what information they give. Now, it doesn't mean they don't know the sport and they don't know the knowledge, but they don't have experience of coaching and people skills, basically. So he was talking about getting people from A to B. Now, I actually tried this today. I had a new lifter. Now, to be fair, she was very, very flexible, so she could get into the positions, and she's had experience in the snatch, which we went over a couple of weeks ago. But we were doing cleans today, and I showed her the A position, so the start position, which we went from the mid-thigh to start with, and then the B position, which was the bottom of the front squat. Now, she could get into a good front squat, so that was fine, but I said get from here to here, and it took her 3 attempts. So the first one, she swung the bar around her. The second one, and then said that felt weird. I didn't say anything. The second attempt, she kept the bar really close, but caught it really high. And then she was like, oh, wait, no, that wasn't down there. And I was like, no. And then she did it on the third attempt, and then she just did it close to the body, caught in the bottom position. And that was probably the fastest I've ever taught someone to do a clean. Especially the turnover, which some people find a little bit weird at first, getting the elbows right. And it blew my mind how fast and how much time was saved. It took about 20 seconds. And if you think about people who say, oh, I don't program weightlifting movements because they're too hard to coach, or, you know, the risk reward for taking so much time out to coach it is absolutely absurd to me. If someone says that, to me, it shows that they don't know the sport enough and they're not confident in their own ability to coach it. But yeah, so try different things with different people. Know that who is suitable, because not everyone's going to be suitable to respond to that, because if they can't move in a certain way, they might not be able to get to position B, for one. So just know your athletes and know that. But yeah, this stuff that I will take forward is the sprinting, and then the looking into that a bit more, and I'm going to look into the bilateral deficit a little bit more. But the thing I've actually already practiced is the A to B thing, so trying not to be too overly, and I've definitely done that in the past, is over-cued. But look, we're pushing 15 minutes. I hope that was useful to people. If it wasn't, that's unlucky because I'm still going to do it. So I hope it was useful, and I'll see you next time.